Hey, hello. Hello to those of you watching on the recording. Welcome to this wonderful talk. Hello, Marianne. Hello, Grace. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Rachel. Hi, Tracy. Nice to see you all. And welcome to our guest speaker today, Catherine. It's so nice to have you here with us, joining us from Devon. And we're going to have a really inspiring talk today. We're going to be talking about how trauma can prevent us from having the relationships that we want and from having the intimacy that we want, so that we long to have. And so I've got some questions that I'm going to be in conversation with Catherine on. And then at the end, we'll open up to a few. And we've also got a couple that have been shared in the community. But as we come in and just center ourselves, whether you're watching on the recording, whether you're here live, we're just going to take a moment just to ground, maybe lowering your gaze or closing your eyes, whatever feels comfortable for you. And we're just going to take a couple of welcome breaths as we connect and just center this afternoon. Maybe just finding your seat wherever you're sitting, just having a little bit of a wiggle of your body, whatever feels good. If you want to have a stretch up or maybe a yawn. And we're just going to take a couple of deeper breaths in just to ground and come into this session. So maybe taking a long inhale through your nose and a longer exhale through your mouth. And then just a couple more like that, breathing in maybe a feeling of calm or whatever you might like to call in this moment. And then when you're ready, just maybe bringing a smile to yourself and then coming back into our live room. And Catherine, welcome. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us about this important topic today on intimacy and relationships. You're down in Devon and you work to support women to thrive, transforming their relationships, their businesses. And is there anything you'd like to share in the introduction? I know you do somatic relationship work and you come very much from a trauma perspective. And as we know, going through cancer experience brings with it its traumas, and then the knock-on element to the relationships that we have is huge as well. So thank you for being here. And is there anything that you would like to share in the introduction as you come into our virtual room?
Oh, just a thank you for inviting me into your space. And I just feel very touched, actually, that you're doing this work, Sophie, and bringing women together who have a shared experience of cancer. Whilst that isn't my personal experience, I do have an experience of trauma. So, I feel like we're kind of kindred spirits here, trying to kind of find our way through the complexities of living in this human body whilst trying to create a life of abundance and success.
Totally. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to dive in because we said there are quite a few elements of this wonderful topic to explore. And so the title of today, just expanding on the ways that trauma can prevent us from the intimacy and what we long for in relationships. So what do we kind of mean by this? What does this mean in that sense?
So let's unpack a few of the words that you've put together in that sentence. So trauma, what we need to be clear about is trauma happens in the body. It's not a cognitive experience, it's a body-based experience first and foremost. And so when we're looking to resolve trauma, we're looking to do work at the level of the body. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay. And so you want to look at this kind of like interface between where does trauma come in and impact our relationships? And really, the first place to look is where does it impact the relationship to self? The relationship to your own body. Now, when we experience trauma, whether it's a shock trauma, a health trauma like cancer, a relational trauma, essentially what we're creating is a disconnect between us and everything else. So when we've experienced trauma, then when we come into a relationship with another person, we're already out of connection with ourselves. We're already disconnected. And when we've experienced something like a health trauma, such as cancer, which I can imagine for some people has been many years, a many years journey of healing, then actually it's probably not safe to be in the body. It's not safe to be embodied. Like, that's where all the bad stuff happened. That's where the cancer happened. That's where the illness happened. That's where the pain happened. That's where the treatment happened. That's where the sickness happened. So why would you want to hang out in that space? So there's often this dissociation that happens when we experience trauma. And it can look in different ways for different people. So the healing journey is really about, can we come back into relationships with ourselves and feel what we couldn't feel at the time because we were so busy with trying to survive, trying to stay alive, trying to get well. So part of that recovery process is actually coming back and feeling probably the terror and the fear and the grief that hasn't yet perhaps been metabolized as part of the healing journey.
And so it's that kind of embodiment practice. And I wonder how we would work with this, or how you might work with this in your work if we don't feel safe in our bodies.
Yeah.
It's a big one, isn't it?
So you say you don't feel safe in your body, right? But that's very kind of like, that's very generalist. So right here, right now, if you feel to, can you find one place in your body that either feels good or neutral? It could be the tip of your finger. It could be the tip of your nose, right? It could be your earlobe. This is the thing with trauma, is that we go into this black and white thinking. Everything is bad, everything is painful, I can't go there. Yet the reality is, there's always somewhere that feels okay. It is just the tip of our finger. So we can be in the tip of our finger whilst there may be pain and grief and fear and anguish happening elsewhere. But can we learn to be in this kind of dual awareness where it's like, I can be, there's pain here, and there is also a place that feels neutral, good, or even possibly pleasurable, right? So we want to be able to expand our capacity to be in this dual awareness, first of all.
Okay.
And you talk about like embodiment practices, and I kind of want to up level that. It's like embodiment as a way of life, rather than this is the embodiment practice I do at 9 o'clock in the morning and then the rest of the day is embodied, right?
Yeah.
How can we actually integrate that into how we live moment to moment?
Totally. So it's a way of life, similar to when people say meditation is just life. It doesn't have to be just that time that we meditate. So when it comes to the nervous system in this sense, are there some ways that we may be able to, and I know that you've just touched on it, ways we may be able to work to heal our nervous systems in the way of relating? Because I guess when it comes to relationships, each person within that is also bringing their own stuff into it. So it's the thing that maybe you've been through a cancer experience, but then your loved one or partner is also experiencing their version of trauma. So it can be quite complex, can't it?
It's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And really, your first kind of question was around the nervous system. And the good news is that we can change what's happening in the nervous system, right? There's a term called neuroplasticity. So the neurons that wire together and fire together can be rearranged and shifted so that we can have new experience.
That's wonderful. Joe Dispenza's work as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So, we don't have to remain stuck because of the experiences that we've had. even though it may feel like we're really stuck in those experiences. So the first thing is to be aware that change is completely possible. I think the second thing to be aware of in what you're speaking into is the different types of trauma that can happen. So cancer is what we would describe as like a shock trauma, right? It's not a developmental trauma, unless it kind of happens when you're really, really young, and then it may be. But, you know, developmental trauma is more kind of a relational trauma. So, for example, you know, you didn't get your needs met when you were growing up. So you learn to ignore and neglect and not tend to your needs as an adult. So let's just create a hypothetical situation here where we've got two people, person A, person B, they're in a relationship together. Person A gets cancer, but person A has developmental trauma and their pattern is to overgive, right? And so they're in a relationship with somebody who matches that, right? So there's an equal and opposite resonance that happens there. Suddenly person A has cancer, they can no longer overgive in the way that they used to. That impacts the relationship because the whole dynamic has shifted between those two people around the expectations of the energetic exchanges in that relationship, right? And you know, a lot of people have developmental trauma, and a lot of people have developmental trauma without being aware of it. So you bring something like a cancer diagnosis into the mix, and it's going to exacerbate challenge, difficulty that was probably already there, but was somehow kind of functioning in some kind of way, perhaps not in its optimum healthy way. But you bring in a crisis and the cracks begin to show.
Yeah, totally. And how can we maybe identify that this is happening for us in terms of maybe trauma affecting the way that we want to be in intimacy or sexual relationships? Would that show up in different ways?
It's got to take a willingness to be able to look at the stuff that's painful. It's got to take a willingness to move beyond blaming the other and instead looking to see, well, actually, what is happening in my internal lived experience in this moment in relationship to the other? It requires some education, like understanding about attachment theory, basic attachment theory. We should all be taught that at school.
Totally.
Right? You know, basic nervous system science, we need to understand that as well. And so then once we have those, they can act as maps for us, and we can get to see, well, where am I on this map right now? Oh, I'm in my pattern of overserving, under-receiving. Okay, this is what it feels like in my physiology when I'm in that place. This is the type of behavior that's going to stem from being in that place. And these are the type of thoughts that are going to arise when I'm in that place. Now that's empowered to have that level of information available about ourselves.
Totally. Okay, so you support people to thrive in their relationships alongside many other things. I wonder what it would mean like to thrive in our relationships given those kind of attachment theories and stuff. Is it a level of awareness? Is it what does that maybe feel or look like in what you've seen?
It takes like one, a level of awareness, a desire. Like you've got to have a burning desire to look at this stuff because it's not easy, right? The willingness and the motivation has to be there. Otherwise it's like, you're not going to do it. You've got to, it's almost like you've got to have a passion for it. Like there's got to be a fire for it. And that fire comes because some part of you knows that there can be a different way. It can feel different.
Yeah.
The relationship might be more easeful. It might be more pleasurable. You might get to receive more. But you have some part of you knows that there is potential for it to be different, and you believe in that. Even if it's only a small fragment of yourself, there is a belief that that's possible.
Totally. And I wonder what then from that post-traumatic growth may look like in this context. So it might be, maybe it's kind of increased confidence in ourselves or in our, because that kind of then reflects in intimacy, doesn't it? Our level of confidence and ability to connect.
Certainly confidence is part of it, but I think it's much more nuanced than that, depending on, whether if it's a shock trauma or a more deeper developmental trauma piece that we're needing to actually heal here. But, what we're looking for is like more fulfillment, more pleasure, more ease in our lives, more capacity, more expansiveness to receive more of life, whether that is love, money, sex, pleasure. So if we think of ourselves as containers, we want these containers to be bigger. So that we get to enjoy this life.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when we have that level of resource available to us, we can then use it to do the good that we want to do in the world. To create the change out there that we want to see. Have the resources and the empowerment to make that happen.
It's almost moving from that kind of contraction to expanding beyond. And I wonder what that would then look like in an intimate partnership if it was just you and a partner. That expansion may be more openness, maybe more harmony, more safety,
more generosity, more love. Ultimately, it all comes down to more love, right?
Yeah, totally.
People with more love in their life.
Yeah. And then how would you work with women, for example, to build confidence in their bodies? Are there some ways that we can reconnect to our kind of somatics, to our bodies in that sense?
Really depends where someone is on their journey of transformation, of connection to the body. You've got to start wherever people are. So I can't give you a kind of 3-step formula here.
No.
Essentially, it's always got to start with a willingness to connect to the body, the willingness to come into a relationship and feel sensation and emotion, and understanding that we might meet some sensation and emotion that might be confronting or difficult or painful for us. We probably need support on that journey. And then it's coming back to what I was speaking to at the beginning. It's like, yeah, we can meet the difficulty and the challenge, but we also want to meet the goodness. Any healing modality that doesn't have the foot firmly anchored in resource, well-being, health, and pleasure is not going to create that, ultimately.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, how can we grow that, what we call like a kind of natural blueprint of well-being, of connection, of goodness? How can we anchor that's more into that place than the challenge, the difficulty, the pain, and the complexity?
And there's that kind of saying that we can only meet others as deeply as we've been willing to meet ourselves. So I guess it kind of starts with that inner processing.
Yeah. And if you're talking about this in the context of relationship, then it really requires both parties to be on board. If one party is trying to pull the other one along, it's not going to work. So, we heard a lot of people talk about conscious relationships. And for me, a conscious relationship is where both parties are really willing to do the work, really willing to look at their shadow parts, really willing to meet emotionally what arises for them in the complexity of relating.
So some ways to build a conscious relationship would be that inner work, shadow parts coming together, and it's almost like it kind of creates this healing environment together.
Exactly. And also having a anchor in the relationship that's based on pleasure.
Pleasure.
Exactly. Because you can't just be doing the deep shadow work together all the
No.
time. It's just going to feel like really hard work. So there's got to be fun, there's got to be pleasure, but there's got to be enough shared interest in things that feel great for both parties, to be able to anchor into that and to resource into that.
And perhaps after a diagnosis, perhaps after treatment, if you are in a relationship, it's this thing of finding something that you can both mutually do that might be different to what you did before, especially because it's kind of like your identity has changed so much that you're more interested in other things. And I know sometimes people go through a health experience and often they want to focus more on their health, and their partner might say, oh, this is kind of not what I want to be doing. And so I wonder how we bring the pleasure into those elements. Maybe it's kind of finding things that are health pleasures that you can do together, especially.
Yeah. I mean, sexuality is an obvious one. But if that's not available because maybe there's complications, post-surgery, post-interventions, we often think about sex as like penis and vagina sex, right? And that's the only way that, sorry, there's a helicopter going overhead. It's the only way that we can engage sexually. But that's just like walking into a restaurant and saying, oh, the only thing on the menu that I can eat is the bread roll, right? It's like there's so much more that's available to us sexually. But if we've been kind of programmed to believe that sex is only penis and vagina sex, if it's in a heterosexual couple, then if that's not available to us anymore, that can be pretty devastating.
Totally. So what are some of the other ways that people may engage? If we can maybe talk to some of those.
Yeah, I mean, we have such a movement towards like penetration being the ultimate goal in sexuality. And I'm talking like here, very much heterosexual sex here.
Yeah, of course. And
we tend to kind of follow this very linear male-based trajectory of sexual arousal, which is I'm going to get aroused, I'm going to have an erection, I need to do something with it, I need to ejaculate, and that's the cycle complete. And a lot of women kind of are complicit in following that journey with men, and they don't actually know how their bodies work, which is a very different cycle of arousal. So whereas a man may get erect, within a few seconds, in a female body, for all of the erectile tissue in a female body to become engorged can take up to 40 minutes.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? And so let's just say that somebody's got greater sensitivity in the vagina post-treatment, and it's uncomfortable. Well, then wait for longer. Wait for yourself to become fully aroused and fully engorged, and it will probably be a very different experience.
Particularly when it comes to dryness.
Especially when it comes to dryness. I mean, I can speak into that. So, I'm a postmenopausal woman, and I've been fortunate that I've managed to kind of hold on to my lubrication, yet many of my friends haven't. And many of the clients I used to work with don't. And so it's tragic, it happens, right? Whether it's menopause or whether it's through treatment, it's tragic, it happens. So there's a few things that need to happen. One is the grief, like mourn the grief, go through the process of loss, accept that as part of it. And then there are a range of like really amazing, wonderful lubricants which can be used. And I recommend a brand called Yes, which are completely organic, natural, and they do oil-based lubricants and water-based lubricants, and you can figure out what works best in your body. But really, if dryness is an issue, you want to deal with that. You don't want to keep trying to override your body by trying to have penetrative sex in a dry vagina. It's just going to be painful, and actually, it's going to create more resistance to future experiences of sexual penetration. Right? right? It's a kind of disembodied relationship.
Totally. We did have a question on this, and it was that they've tried lots of different things for dryness, and nothing's really seemed to work. And there was that kind of missing of spontaneous sex, spontaneous intimacy. Would you have any kind of wisdom to share on that?
It's the same piece. It's like, meet the grief of that, the sadness of that. Allow that to take the time. It's like something got lost along the way, you know, and we often don't give grief the space that it needs to be able to move through it. So if someone's asking me that question, that tells me they haven't moved through the grief yet. They're still hoping and wishing it was different. So by allowing the grief, we can move in through to a place of acceptance. It's like, okay, it doesn't work like that for me anymore. Am I now open and willing to explore a different way? But trying to kind of like hold on to something that's already gone is just incredibly painful.
And I guess maybe it needs a bit more space and it needs a bit more time. It's that kind of process.
Yeah.
Because we have so many receptors, that kind of brain vagina, or brain, just genitals and general connection is so strong, isn't it?
And like I was saying before, penis and vagina sex isn't the only way to have pleasure.
Yeah.
So, you know, what could be interesting if I was maybe working with this person and it were like, so why are you so fixated on penis and vagina sex?
I wonder if it's because on the other side, the partner is more fixated on that.
So there's the expectation of the partner. So there's a relational piece there that needs addressing. Like, my body's not capable of doing this anymore. You're trying to force me to do this. I feel like I have to go along with this. So there's some pieces to unpack there around boundaries, around consent to self, consent with the other, entitlement.
And I guess what if it's wanted on both sides? It's that kind of, I guess, spontaneity and how things were. And there is also that element of wanting to go back to how we might have been before a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
And have you seen that can take time, and we can kind of rebuild that muscle, or that way of relating?
Look, you know, just like going through a traumatic experience is a transformational experience. There is no going back to how it used to be, right? But there's going forwards to something that is new and different. Probably a whole lot better than what it used to be. You know, we're kind of fixated on keeping things as they are because it keeps us feeling safe, it keeps us feeling loved, it keeps us feeling valuable. But can we actually allow these natural transitions to happen inside of us? You know, like going through menopause. I mean, I don't know how the ages of the people who are on this call are, or the people who'll be watching it. I've gone through an early menopause, and you know, there's been a huge transition that's had to happen for me. And I'm embracing who I am on this side of it. And it's like, you know, I've not had children, I can't have children now. There's been a huge kind of process of loss in this transition. But I've been willing to meet that. And now I'm this new version of myself. Right? So it's like, can we embrace the new? Can we embrace the unknown? Can we embrace the uncertainty? Is there enough safety in the nervous system to allow that to happen? Kind of come back full circle to that piece.
It's the essential piece, isn't it? Working with the nervous system. It's kind of like that moment of shedding, isn't it? The death and rebirth of what was isn't anymore, and then what we're moving into. It's the new kind of cycle.
Yeah. And you know, if we were to live in a much more attuned life, those transitions would be marked and celebrated and honoured, rather than us trying to live in eternal maidenhood, which is what the dominant culture kind of forces us into being.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of, we might have more ritual, we might have more ceremony, we might honor those cycles in a different way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And spaces where that can happen. There's spaces to take the grief. Grief composting circles exist everywhere for that to happen. I mean, that's what I'd like to see, right?
You'd like to see what? More circles?
More grief composting circles. They're places we can take our grief to, right?
Interesting. Okay. I haven't actually come across any of those.
Right. Yeah.
There's some down in Devon.
Of course, you know, I live in Totnes, so there's everything's down here.
It's all happening there.
It's all happening down. Yeah.
Would you be open to sharing some of the things that have supported you in this process, or on your kind of learning over the years that you've been involved in this work?
Oof, I mean, everything has helped to a degree. Some has been helpful because it was so bad. It made me realize that I deserved something better.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, the nervous system piece is so central to this. I mean, I'm grateful that it's becoming so much more available within the public domain, this information. Certainly when I started psychotherapy many years ago, trauma just wasn't a word.
No.
It just wasn't a thing, right? And so now that it is understood and it's become much more mainstream, and there's many people teaching about it, for me, it's like it is the foundation from which everything else comes from. So, you know, if we can develop nervous system awareness, develop an approach to a deeper embodiment of our nervous system, a willingness to devote, and I say that word specifically, like devote yourself to creating nervous system health. This neuroplasticity I was speaking into, it takes time, right? It's not just like I'm going to do this one workshop, I'm going to do this one session and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah.
Right? It takes repetition, because those neural pathways have wired together because of repetition. To unwire them and rewire them in a different configuration requires repetition of these new behaviors and patterns and habits and beliefs, right? So, you know, and it also requires, you know, a level of like cognitive awareness as well, in terms of what is it that we are saying to ourselves? What thoughts are we feeding ourselves on a daily basis? Remember, I was saying that, you know, nervous system physiology, behavior and thoughts, you can map those into constellations. So when somebody's in a, let's say, a collapsed place in their physiology, there's going to be like a postural shift. There's going to be a behavioral shift of like, I can't do anything. There's going to be a narrative that goes along that, which is like, I'm no good at this. I'm useless. I'm worthless, blah, 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 right? So we've got to look at these like constellations and see that whilst nervous system healing is mainly like body up healing, there is a place to do like top down healing, which is becoming kind of like the custodian of our minds, becoming the caretaker and the gatekeeper of what we allow to happen in that space.
Totally. And yeah, that witnessing and then in the context of all of this, having that awareness maybe of the thoughts that we might be bringing into an intimate space, or the stories that we may be telling ourselves that maybe we need to or would benefit from exploring, creating in a different way. And that element of, I have the option to choose who I want to be in this relating environment, or yeah, it's a level of kind of creation, isn't it, slightly, while working with the nervous system, of planting new seeds.
Yeah.
And it because could be things.
When we allow the thought, like maybe someone's in a relationship and they've had treatment that's meant that kind of part of their body doesn't look the same way that it used to anymore.
Yes.
Right? And, you know, and there's a feeling of like, oh, when I look at myself or when I experience myself in an intimate relationship, in an intimate encounter, I don't feel like a woman anymore. I don't feel sexy anymore. I don't feel lovable anymore. I don't feel desirable anymore, right? So when those thoughts are coming in, guess what's going to be happening to the physiology in the body, right? It's responding, like the nervous system's listening, going, oh, wow, okay, if that's the reality, then something needs to shift here, collapse, like flight, I need to get away from this situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to undermine how difficult it is to be in that situation.
Mm-hmm. And maybe we can work with things like visualization.
I mean, visualization, you know, it does help, but really, again, you know, it's like if a body part is now missing or it looks dramatically different to how it used to, then guess what? We need to do the grief work around that. Can we create ritual around that for ourselves and allow that transition to take place, and then to step into the new version of who we are? It's a new identity that we step into. The old identity may have associated looking a certain way with being loved and valued and regarded as being sexy. So we shift into a new identity that allows you to be loved and to be considered to be sexy in this new way of looking. And that actually your worthiness and well-being isn't dependent upon what others think of how you look.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of work to get there. Don't want to underestimate that. I don't want to kind of pretend it's like step 1, 2, 3 and you're there.
Yeah. It is an ongoing big process, isn't it?
It is, but the rewards are really worth it.
Yeah, it sounds like grief is quite a key part of this, grieving the identity or the way that we used to be to make space for the new transition and things to come in.
Exactly.
A couple of final questions from me before I share a few from the community, and anyone else who wants to ask a question here, we'll go to those. But how do you think we can embody our power a little bit more in relationships? How can we kind of move into that maybe higher version of where we want to be?
So much to say about that. I mean, really, what I see for a lot of women is coming into a relationship with what it is that they truly need, right? Noticing what it is that they need, naming what it is that they need, and receiving what they need. That's a foundational shift in the relationship. And I could spend the next 6 months talking in detail about that, right? And coupled with the coming into awareness of what we need, we come into a different relationship with our boundaries. So we're in a deeper relationship with consent with ourselves. And that is empowerment. I want this, I don't want that. I want things to be this way. I want to share like this, I want to relate like this.
Which is huge because so many of us aren't aware of our needs. Yeah.
Because of developmental trauma and the way in which society places women and the role of estrogen in female bodies. So estrogen is a hormone that enables us to give to others.
Okay.
Right? And so when we're still cycling, every month we go into that phase of like, oh, I'm going to be the most generous person in the world. And if we're over giving already, and if we're overextending ourselves already, then that estrogen just takes us into like super over giving. And we get rewarded in our society for being women who overgive.
Okay. And do you think because of those hormones, that tends to be more female bodies rather than male?
Well, totally. It's part of the socialization process. But as a body who now has a lot less estrogen than I used to, I have the overgiving is much less of a problem these days.
Oh, really? So that's interesting. So maybe it's menopausal women that are like that. We have that tendency It's a funny kind of, on a deeper level, it's a funny way, isn't it? Because it's almost like as you mature, you develop more boundaries potentially, or you are more connected to your needs, maybe, if you have that awareness.
If you've done the work on it, it didn't just happen because I went through menopause. It happened
No.
because there's a lot of work involved in it. But you realize as you go through menopause that estrogen really holds a lot up for you. And with the absence of estrogen, then the things that you used to be able to do, you can't do anymore.
Interesting.
There just isn't the hormone there that supports it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So many elements, but it really, it comes, the nervous system, it's that thing that in order to heal, we really need to regulate that. And it's, as you say, it's not spoken about enough within the context of, well, medical side of things and stuff. It's just key.
Yeah.
I
just want to say, healing happens when the nervous system is regulated.
Yeah.
Right? There's a branch of the nervous system, the ventral vagus. When we're in that place, that's when healing happens. Not when we're dysregulated. So if we do have like an illness that we're experiencing, whether it's something as severe as cancer or something kind of much more minor than that, we want to get our nervous system into that most optimum place for healing.
Totally. And we would notice that because, for example, if we experience dissociation or any of the kind of trauma responses in situations, particularly in the hospital, then that will then carry into our relationships and experiences as well. Thank you for sharing. Catherine, is there anything else that you would like to share on this topic or anything inspiring you at the moment?
Oh, I mean, I could talk endlessly, but I'm curious about the questions that are there as well.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you all. I have a couple of questions that have been shared with me. And then if anyone has anything that they'd like to ask in the chat box today, or if you want to share it to me privately, and then I'll just read it out without any names, then please feel free to ask that and we'll ask Catherine. But the first question I have for you is, it's a question, and I know we've touched on it, about getting over trauma related to procedures for gynae cancer and finding freedom and safety in my body after those procedures. So I guess it's what we said about those parts changing.
Yeah, I mean, there's different aspects to speak into here. So when there's been surgery, there's going to be scar tissue. And scar tissue is basically a disconnect in the body. And when I used to do a lot of more hands-on body work, I worked a lot with scar tissue, pelvically, intervaginally, C-section scars, etc. And we want to be able to bring blood flow back to those areas. So we want to reconnect to those places. So there are like different practices that you can do, such as castor oil packs placed on the abdomen. You can do internal castor oil by placing castor oil on organic tampons and inserting them. You could work with a practitioner who knows how to do internal work around scar tissue. So that's one piece to be aware of. So there's like a physical aspect to it. And then there is also what the grief is, obviously, that's going to be an aspect to it as well. But what can often happen when we've had these like major surgical procedures is a complete dissociation from that part of the body. A complete like, there's no one home. There's no one there anymore. That's the scary place. That's the place where the cancer was. You know, that's the place where the trauma happened. I don't want to go there. And so, you know, in trauma, we talk about this term titration. And essentially what that means is, let's say like, this is the trauma here. And this is the place where it feels good or neutral in my body. And can I come over to this place where it feels challenging and just feel one drop of it, and then come back to the place where it feels okay in myself? Because often there's this really big, scary place in my body and I don't want to go there. Anything from the belly button down, it's just out of bounds. So we just want to take this approach to gently reconnect slowly to the body, one moment at a time, going back and forth, back and forth. And so we can begin to feel what is actually there within the tissue on an emotional level, which is probably fear, terror, maybe rage as well, grief bound up in the experience, and slowly allow that to be metabolized. I mean, again, this is the type of work I would recommend doing with someone who's trained in this approach, at least to begin with, at least until you've got a reference map for it. Because that part of the body is just it's just holding on to everything for you. And it's that poor kind of pelvic area, wow, it's ending up being this dumping ground for everything. And it will continue to hold all of that material. But in my experience, the more disconnected you are from a body part, the more susceptible it is to further disease, further ill health, further problems.
Totally.
And the fact that that's the area where cancer has happened suggests to me a prehistory of complication in that area, a prehistory of dissociation to that part of the body. And there could be a multitude of reasons as to why that's happened. It could be a history of painful periods, which led to a dissociation, which led to no one actually being present in that part of the body. And then disease can take place. That dissociation is like a freeze response. A freeze response is the most unhealthy response in the nervous system, where we see chronic health conditions and disease manifesting.
Interesting, thank you. And then I have another question. So let me just find that one for you. Thank you so much for answering that.
You're welcome.
What do you suggest when your husband goes off the idea of sex once you have had cancer, and whatever you have tried has not worked to turn the passion on again? It becomes such a sensitive subject that he refuses to talk about it, and he has denied that it has happened.
Right. So this is complex, this situation. So what's happening here is one partner is being rejected. I want to engage, I want to have sex, I want to be with you, and the other person is in a place of rejection. And I'm also hearing that the one who's rejecting, the husband in this case, is also in denial of rejection actually happening. And so this is difficult. There's an unwillingness to move. There's an unwillingness here to meet what's really going on. And I imagine the person who's being rejected is probably feeling really fearful that there's going to be loss. There's going to be loss of connection, loss of attachment, loss of love, potentially, in this situation. So the female member of this partnership is probably trying to do all the doing and trying to do all the work to fix it and make it better and make it okay. And so here's another one of those situations where, and imagine there's probably a lot of anxiety in this person's nervous system as I feel this situation. And so here's another situation where it's okay, well, I can go into fix it mode and take complete responsibility for this situation, or I can face the reality and go into the grief that's needed to meet this more fully. Because something needs to shift in this dynamic. We've kind of got a kind of push-pull situation happening here. The female partner is I want to get close to you. The male one's no, I'm pulling away. I want to get close. No, I'm pulling away. So if that dynamic just stops and the female partner is allowing herself to feel the grief, then there is an opportunity and space for the husband to do something differently.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah, I'm just reflecting on also what you were saying earlier about, so becoming aware of our needs. This is what I want, this is what I don't want. And then maybe communicating that with a partner. If you, again, this is that relationship, but that also comes into all intimate relationships. And then knowing our boundaries and what isn't okay is that kind of key one as well.
It's about being in consent with ourselves and the other in the relationship. And like I said at the beginning, you know, something like a cancer diagnosis can make the cracks that were already in the relationship get bigger.
Totally.
Right? When I used to work with couples, one of the first questions I said to them is that, are you willing to end this relationship if we conclude that it doesn't work for one or both of you?
Are you willing to end?
Yeah.
Yeah.
End the relationship.
Because so many people can't end it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's another piece around like our attachment style, our dependency style, our developmental trauma, our financial situation, etc., etc. It's a complex situation. So in this person's situation, you know, one, are they willing to walk away if after a given period of time they're still not getting their needs met in this relationship? And if they're not, then can they do the process work around what that brings up for them?
Okay.
Every way you look at it, change is inevitable in this situation.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Has anyone here got any questions that they may like to ask? And if not, we're all good. Thank you, Catherine. It's been wonderful to hear you and to hear everything you shared. It's been really insightful and inspiring, and appreciating the work that you do. I've shared your website with the community and I'll share it again with our replay.
Thank you.
And then we'll forward that on to you.
It was a pleasure being here, to be invited in, to have opportunity to talk into the questions that you asked me. It's one of my favourite things to do, is to be in this position. So
thank you.
Thank you for the invitation from yourself and from your community to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for being here. Have a good rest of your afternoon. And see you soon. Bye, Marianne. Bye, Lynn. Bye, Rachel. Bye, Grace. Bye, Tracy. Marianne saying thank you so much. This was so inspiring. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Lisa. Bye, Grace. Bye-bye. And thank you to those of you watching on the recording.